Amelia Kirsten had never been the kind of woman who ran from problems, but the past 8 months had left her feeling as though she had been quietly eroded from the inside. Divorce had taken more than just a ring and shared furniture. It had stripped layers she didn't know she wore, leaving behind someone she barely recognized. The apartment felt too small now, too expensive, the walls leaning inward whenever she stood still long enough to notice. Her job at the insurance company felt mechanical, each keystroke another brick in a wall she was building around herself without meaning to. The morning she decided to go hiking, she woke earlier than usual. Not because she slept well, sleep had become something her body no longer understood, but because something inside urged her out of bed. She stood by the window for a long moment, watching gray light collect on distant rooftops. Her breath fogged the glass. For a second, she thought about crawling back under the covers, living another day that felt like all the others. But then she heard Lily stirring in the next room, the soft shuffle of small feet padding toward the bathroom. Lily, 9 years old, smart, curious, too perceptive for her own good. The custody battle had been brief. Amelia's ex-husband hadn't fought hard for anything except the house and the better car. Lily was hers. That should have felt like a victory, but most days it felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. Not because she didn't love her daughter. She loved Lily more than breathing. But the constant worry about money, about whether she was enough, about whether Lily would grow up resenting this smaller, quieter life. It pressed down on her chest every morning before she even opened her eyes. She knocked gently on Lily's door. "Hey, sweetheart, want to go on an adventure today?" Lily appeared in the doorway, dark hair tangled from sleep, eyes still heavy. "What kind of adventure?" "Hiking, just you and me. We'll pack sandwiches, find a trail we've never been on." Lily's expression shifted, something between interest and caution. "Like we used to do with Dad?" The words landed harder than Lily probably meant them to. Amelia swallowed. "Like we're going to do now. Just us." They drove out of the city as the sun climbed higher, Amelia rolling down her window to let cold autumn air slap her awake. Trees blurred into deep green and rusty orange on both sides of the highway. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, earbuds in, watching the landscape slide past. They drove through small towns that looked like they were slowly being forgotten, past diners with flickering signs and stretches of farmland where nothing seemed to move. The trail Amelia chose wasn't popular. She'd found it on an outdated hiking forum, described as challenging but rewarding. The gravel parking lot held only two other vehicles, both covered in a thin layer of dust. Birds stirred in the branches overhead. The sky looked like brushed steel. "You ready?" Amelia adjusted her backpack, checking the straps. Lily pulled out her earbuds, studying the trailhead marker. "How long is it?" "About 6 miles. We can turn back whenever you want." They started down the path. Fallen pine needles made the ground soft, muffling their steps. The canopy overhead filtered pale morning light into scattered patches that moved with the wind. Amelia felt the tension in her shoulders begin to loosen, if only slightly. Out here, nothing demanded anything from her. No emails, no bills stacked on the counter. No lawyer's letters reminding her of what she'd lost. Lily walked a few steps ahead, occasionally stopping to examine something. A twisted branch, a cluster of mushrooms growing from a rotting log, a bird's nest wedged into the crook of a tree. She'd always been like this, even as a toddler. Curious about everything, asking questions faster than Amelia could answer them. Where do clouds go when they disappear? Why do some trees lose their leaves and others don't? What happens to all the rain that falls in the ocean? Hours passed as they climbed higher. The trail curved between ancient trees scarred by storms, dipped into shallow ravines where damp earth clung to their boots, then rose again towards sunlit clearings. Somewhere in the middle of the hike, Amelia found her thoughts wandering to her marriage. Not in the sharp, painful way they usually did, but as if she were watching a film she had already seen too many times. The arguments that always circled back to nothing. The final conversation at the kitchen table. The way he avoided her eyes when he said he was done pretending they could fix anything. She realized with a bitter kind of acceptance that she hadn't been grieving him. She'd been grieving herself. The version of herself she thought she'd be by now. The life she thought she was building. "Mom, look!" Lily's voice pulled her back. They'd reached a ridge where the trees thinned. Below them, the forest spread out in waves of green and gold. But Lily wasn't pointing at the view. She was pointing at something off the trail, partially hidden by overgrown brush. A house, or what was left of one. It stood on an incline as though clinging to the hillside, its frame slightly tilted, its boards sun-bleached to a washed-out gray. The roof sagged toward the center. A porch leaned so heavily to one side, it seemed a strong wind might push it the rest of the way down. It looks like something from a fairy tale, Lily breathed. Amelia stared. The house didn't belong there. Not on a hiking trail, not this deep in the woods. Something about it made her stop mid-step. It wasn't merely abandoned. It looked forgotten. Forgotten in the way an old photograph fades until the faces become ghosts. Can we get closer? Lily was already moving toward it. Stay where I can see you. They approached carefully, stepping over gnarled tree roots in patches of moss. The closer they got, the more details emerged. Peeling paint, broken shutters hanging by rusted hinges. A window on the upper floor missing its glass entirely, leaving only a jagged frame that gaped like an open mouth. Lily found something half buried in the weeds near the foundation. She knelt down, brushing dirt away. Mom, look, there's writing. A small wooden sign, weathered and cracked. The letters were barely legible, but Amelia could make them out. Hartley Residence. Someone lived here, Lily whispered. They circled the house slowly. Through the broken windows, Amelia could see furniture still inside. A couch draped in a sheet, a rocking chair positioned near the fireplace. The glass in some windows was so dirty it was nearly opaque. But in others, she could see straight through to rooms that looked like they'd been abandoned in the middle of an ordinary day. Why would someone just leave all their stuff? Lily pressed her face close to a window, cupping her hands around her eyes to see better. I don't know, sweetheart. Amelia pulled out her phone, took several photos. The light was starting to fade. They'd been hiking longer than she realized. They needed to start back before it got dark. But as they walked away, Amelia kept glancing over her shoulder. Each time she had the strange impression that the house looked different, as though adjusting itself when she wasn't watching. That night, after they'd returned home and Lily had showered and changed into pajamas, Amelia sat on the couch with her laptop. She couldn't stop thinking about the house. She uploaded the photos, studying them on the larger screen. The structure looked even more out of place in digital clarity. The forest behind it, a blurred backdrop, made the house appear almost staged, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. She searched for abandoned houses in the region. After scrolling through pages of real estate auctions and county records, she found it. Lot 47. Starting bid, $250. Property condition, not inhabitable. Structural instability. Ownership, no active claims. There were older notes attached to the listing. Comments about previous attempts to auction it, but none successful. Every few years, the city reposted the property. Every few years, it sat unsold. She clicked through archived comments from local residents. Some mentioned strange noises. Others wrote that no contractor ever stayed long enough to finish an inspection. One person claimed they'd seen lights flickering inside the house at night, even though it had no electrical connection. But most comments carried a different tone. Not afraid, but resigned. Leave it, someone wrote. That house isn't for us. Another said, it'll get the right owner someday. Amelia stared at those words. They had a weight she couldn't explain, as if the house had a destiny tied to someone, and she had stumbled into its path. Mom? She looked up. Lily stood in the doorway in her oversized pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Can't sleep? Lily padded over and climbed onto the couch. I keep thinking about that house. Me too. Do you think we could buy it? Amelia blinked. What? It's only $250. We have that, right? Lily leaned forward, looking at the laptop screen. We could fix it up. It could be like a project. You're always saying we need something to look forward to. The idea was absurd. The house was probably a death trap. The roof alone would cost thousands to repair. But Amelia looked at her daughter's face, lit by the glow of the screen, and saw something she hadn't seen in months, hope. Let me think about it, she said quietly. But by morning, she had looked at the listing so many times she'd memorized its details. She didn't remember making the decision. It didn't come as a thought or a plan. It came the same way stepping outside that morning had, an instinctual pull stronger than doubt. She filled out the application for the upcoming municipal auction. When she pressed submit, A strange calm settled over her, like the moment before a storm, when the world holds its breath. The morning of the auction arrived gray and drizzly. Amelia drove Lily to the municipal building, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She'd slept poorly, waking several times with the image of the house lingering in her mind like a half-formed dream. The auction room was smaller than she expected. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, plastic chairs arranged in uneven rows, a handful of middle-aged men in work boots and baseball caps sipping coffee from foam cups. A woman behind a folding table checked people in with the weary politeness of someone who'd done the same task for years. Name? Amelia Kirsten. The woman's fingers paused over her keyboard. She glanced up. You're here for a residential lot? Yes, lot 47. The woman's expression shifted, just slightly, something that might have been surprise or concern. She handed Amelia a bidding card without comment, but her gaze lingered a moment too long. Amelia took a seat near the back. Lily sat beside her, quiet and observant. The auction moved quickly. Properties sold for modest amounts. Small parcels on the outskirts of town, homes needing renovations but still salvageable. People raised their cards lazily, chatting between bids. Then the auctioneer reached lot 47. His tone shifted, if only slightly. Next, we have lot 47, unclaimed structure, rural zone, opening bid at $250. The room grew quieter. A few people glanced at one another, then looked away. No one raised a card. Amelia felt that familiar pressure in her chest again, the same pull she'd felt in the forest. She lifted her bidding card. The auctioneer paused, surprised. His gaze drifted across the room. No one else moved. Some men stared at the floor. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sold for $250. When the session ended, Amelia signed paperwork at a different table. An older official with thinning white hair handed her the deed. He adjusted his glasses, studying her face as if trying to understand something he wouldn't dare ask aloud. You should know that house has been on the docket for a long time. Not many people take an interest. I saw it during a hike. I see. He tapped the corner of the deed lightly. Well, it's yours now. Best of luck. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh and cool. Amelia breathed deeply, finding the scent oddly invigorating. Lily squeezed her hand. We did it, Lily whispered. We did. As they walked toward the car, a voice called out behind them. Excuse me. Amelia turned. A tall man approached, maybe late 60s, wearing a flannel jacket and work jeans. His face was weathered but kind, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. You just bought the Hartley house. It wasn't a question. Amelia nodded slowly. You know it. My father built it. He extended a hand. Frank Morrison. I'm a carpenter. Well, retired now, but I grew up hearing about that house. Lily looked up at him with interest. Did you ever go inside? Frank's expression softened when he looked at her. Once or twice, when I was young, before the family disappeared. Disappeared, Jay? Amelia's pulse quickened. Frank glanced around the parking lot, then back at them. Maybe we should talk somewhere more private. I can help you assess the structure if you'd like. I know every inch of that place. At least, I know what my father built. Why would you want to help? Frank's jaw tightened. Because there's a story that needs telling, and maybe you're the person who can finally tll it. They agreed to meet at the house the next morning. Frank gave Amelia his phone number and a brief nod before walking to his truck. As he drove away, Lily tugged Amelia's sleeve. Mom, what did he mean about a family disappearing? Amelia had no answer, but that night her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't go to that house. Some things should stay buried. She deleted the message without replying. Then she went to check on Lily, who was already asleep, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. Amelia stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. Whatever she'd started by buying that house, there was no turning back now. The next morning arrived cold and bright. Amelia and Lily drove to the house with a toolbox in the trunk and flashlights in their backpacks. Frank's truck was already there when they arrived, parked in the overgrown clearing that might have once been a driveway. He stood near the front steps, hands in his pockets, staring up at the structure. Morning, monsieur, Amelia called. Frank turned. Morning, I brought some equipment. Thought we'd start with a basic safety inspection before you go wandering around in there. Lily bounded up to him. Mr. Morrison, you said a family disappeared. What happened to them? Frank crouched down to her level. That's what we're going to try to find out. But first, let's make sure this old place doesn't fall down on our heads. The front door hung loosely on its hinges. When Amelia pushed it open, it groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood and something sweeter, faded lilacs or dried herbs. The floorboards creaked under their weight. Lily stepped in first, eyes wide. The living room held the sagging couch they'd glimpsed through the window. A rocking chair sat nearby, positioned as though someone had been sitting there recently. The fireplace contained cold ashes that didn't look as old as they should have been. Frank moved through the space with purpose, testing floorboards, checking walls, examining the ceiling for signs of water damage. He spoke as he worked, his voice taking on the cadence of a man who told himself this story many times. The family was named Hartley, Robert, Martha, and their son David. The boy was 7 years old in 1971. That's when they vanished. Amelia watched Lily explore carefully, running her fingers along dusty surfaces. What do you mean vanished? One day they were here. The next, they were gone. Police said they left voluntarily, didn't leave a forwarding address, just packed up and moved on. Frank's voice hardened. But my father knew Robert Hartley. They wouldn't have left this house. Not willingly. Your father built it? He did. And he built something else too. Something special Robert Hartley requested right before they disappeared. Frank paused in front of the fireplace, staring at the cold ashes. My father never told me what it was, only that it was the most important work he ever did. Lily knelt by the fireplace, examining something. Mom, these ashes aren't that old. Frank walked over. He brushed his fingers across the gray powder, surprised. You have a good eye, young lady. How can ashes be here if the family left in 1971? Lily looked up at them both. No one had an answer. They moved through the rooms slowly. In the kitchen, cabinets with chipped paint held plates and utensils arranged neatly, as if the family had simply left one morning and never returned. A photograph hung crookedly on the wall. 3 silhouettes, tall man, shorter woman, small child, standing in front of this very house. But their heads had been crudely cut out of the photo, leaving empty spaces where faces should have been. Lily found it first. She pulled at a small drawer beneath a built-in bench by the fireplace. Most people would have missed it. The seam was barely visible. But Lily's curious fingers found the tiny groove. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Mom. Her voice was barely a whisper. Amelia took the paper carefully, unfolding it. The handwriting was elegant, but hurried. A woman's hand. The words were simple but chilling. October 19th, 1971. They came inside. If anyone reads this, please remember us. Martha Hartley. Frank's face went pale. October 19th. That's the night they disappeared. Amelia's hands trembled as she held the note. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a crime scene that had been waiting 52 years for someone to find it. We need to see upstairs, Frank said quietly. The stairs groaned under their weight. The air on the second floor felt colder. A narrow hallway led to 2 bedrooms. One door hung crookedly on a hinge, revealing a bedroom with a broken dresser and bare mattress. The other door was cracked open just enough to reveal darkness. Frank pushed it wider. An adult bedroom. Dust coated the dresser and nightstands. A cracked mirror hung above the vanity. But what drew Amelia's attention immediately was the heavy oak wardrobe against the wall. It was far larger than modern wardrobes, intricately carved with patterns she didn't recognize. Swirls, lines, something like stylized wings. This is beautiful, Lily said, running her hand over the carvings. Frank stood very still. My father made this. Amelia approached it, wrapping her fingers around one of the metal handles. She pulled. The door barely budged. She tugged harder. It remained stubbornly in place. That's strange. She crouched down to investigate. Metal bolts at the base of the wardrobe screwed directly into the floorboards. Someone fastened this to the ground. Frank knelt beside her. Why would anyone bolt furniture to the floor? Lily squeezed behind the wardrobe, pressing her palm against the wall. There's a line here, in the wall, like a seam. Amelia and Frank looked at each other. Frank pulled a tape measure from his belt, checking the dimensions of the room. He walked into the hallway, measuring again. His face went white. This room is 6 feet shorter on the inside than it should be. What does that mean? Lily asked. It means there's a space behind that wardrobe. Frank's voice shook. My father built a hidden room. The temperature seemed to drop. Amelia felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Why would he do that? Because Robert Hartley asked him to. Frank sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. My father told me once, late at night when he had been drinking. He said Robert was terrified of something. Said he needed a place to hide his son if things got bad. From what? Amelia whispered. I don't know. My father died before I worked up the courage to ask more questions. Frank looked at the wardrobe with something like reverence, but he said he'd never been prouder of any work he'd done. He said he'd built David Hartley a safe place. Lily stood very still. The boy, David, he was my age? Close, 7 when he vanished. Not vanished, Lily said softly. Hidden. The word hung in the air. Amelia's mind raced. A family that disappeared overnight. A mother's desperate note. A wardrobe bolted to the floor, hiding a room built specifically to protect a child. We need to open it, Amelia said. Frank nodded slowly. Not tonight. We need proper tools. And we need to document everything. Whatever's behind there has been sealed for 52 years. When we open it, we need to do it right. They decided to spend the night. Amelia wanted to save money on rent, and despite everything, the house felt safer with 3 of them there. They cleared out a room on the first floor, set up sleeping bags. Frank insisted on staying too. I'm not leaving you two in here on your first night. Lily fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day. Amelia and Frank sat in the living room, flashlights casting long shadows. Frank told her more about his father, about growing up in this town, about the rumors that had swirled around the Hartley disappearance for decades. My son, Frank said eventually, his voice rough. Michael, he was David Hartley's best friend. Amelia hadn't expected that. Were they in the same class? Neighbors, actually. Our house was about a mile down the road. Michael and David were inseparable. When David disappeared, Michael never recovered. Frank's hands clenched. He kept asking when his friend would come back, kept having nightmares. The doctor said it was childhood trauma, that he'd grow out of it. He didn't. At 20 years old, Michael took his own life. He left a note, said he couldn't live without knowing what happened to David. Amelia's throat tightened. Frank, I'm so sorry. I've carried that for 40 years, the guilt that I didn't push harder to find answers, that I let my son live with that uncertainty until it killed him. Frank looked at her. That's why I approached you at the auction. I've been waiting, hoping someone would come who could finally uncover the truth. Why me? I don't know, but when I saw you raise that card, something in my gut said you were the one. At 2 in the morning, Amelia woke to footsteps overhead. Her eyes snapped open. Lily slept soundly beside her. Frank was sitting up, already alert. You heard it too? He nodded. The footsteps moved slowly across the ceiling, back and forth. Someone was in the bedroom directly above them. The bedroom with the wardrobe. Frank grabbed a flashlight. Stay here with Lily. No, Amelia stood. We go together. They crept upstairs. The hallway was dark except for their flashlight beams. The bedroom door stood open. Frank swept his light across the room. Empty. But the wardrobe, one of the handles gleamed as if recently touched. Someone was here, Amelia breathed. They searched the entire second floor. Nothing. No one. But when they came back downstairs, they found something that made Amelia's blood run cold. A white envelope taped to the front door. Her name written in block letters. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Last warning, leave now. What you find will destroy you. Frank crumpled the note in his fist. They're scared. That means we're close. Who are they? I don't know yet, but someone doesn't want us in this house. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. What's going on? Amelia forced a smile. Nothing, sweetheart. Just thought we heard an animal outside. But Lily's eyes went to the crumpled paper in Frank's hand. She was too smart to be fooled easily. Someone's trying to scare us away, aren't they? Amelia knelt down. Yes. Does that frighten you? Lily thought about it. A little, but if someone wants us to stop looking, that means there's something important to find. Something about David, right? Frank smiled despite himself. You're absolutely right. Then we should keep looking, Lily said firmly. David's been waiting a long time. The next morning, they gathered their tools. Frank brought a power drill, a crowbar, a camera to document everything. Lily was given the tag of official photographer. Frank showed her how to take clear, well-lit photos of each step of the process. The bolts were old, their metal mottled with rust, but they'd been installed with precision. Frank worked carefully, loosening each one. The sound echoed through the house. When the last bolt clattered to the floor, they all stared at the wardrobe. Ready? Frank asked. Amelia nodded. Together, they pushed. The wardrobe resisted at first as though rooted into the floor, but gradually it began to slide. Dust rose in thick clouds. As the massive piece of furniture moved away from the wall, a thin vertical seam became visible. A door, the same color as the wall, fitted so precisely it would be invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The door had no knob, only a faint indentation where someone might pry it open with fingertips. Frank pressed his palm against the surface. The wood was cold, unnaturally cold. He slipped his fingers into the crack and pulled. The hinges screamed, their voices the sharp cry of metal long unused. The door gave way slowly, revealing darkness beyond. A breath of stale, icy air escaped. Amelia shone her flashlight into the opening. A narrow corridor stretched downward at a steep angle, its walls lined with aged wooden planks. She took a step forward. I should go first, Frank said. We go together. Lily took her mother's hand. They descended slowly, one hand trailing along the wall. The beam of Amelia's flashlight illuminated worn steps leading down into deeper darkness. At the bottom, another door. Frank pushed it open. The room beyond was small, 10 by 12 feet, but perfectly preserved. A child's bedroom, frozen in time. A small bed, neatly made with a patterned quilt. A wooden nightstand with a faded lamp. A simple desk with worn corners. Shelves lined with children's toys, wooden blocks, a carved horse, a cloth doll whose stitched smile had faded. But what struck Amelia most was the stillness, not the absence of sound, but the sense that the room had been waiting, protected, preserved with deliberate care. Lily stepped inside slowly. This was David's room. On the walls, someone had painted stars and little clouds. The colors had muted with time, but the love in each brushstroke was unmistakable. Amelia's throat constricted. A mother had painted these. Martha Hartley had decorated this hidden sanctuary for her son, knowing what was coming. Frank sat down on the small bed, tears streaming down his face. Michael's friend. This is where they hid him. On the desk lay a thick notebook. Amelia opened it carefully. The handwriting was the same elegant script from the note in the fireplace. Martha's diary. She began to read aloud, her voice shaking. October 1st, 1971, Robert refused to sign the transfer papers. They've threatened us. Tonight, someone broke our front window. October 5th, the police won't help. Chief Wilson is one of them. We called Frank Morrison, Mr. Morrison Sr., to build the room for David. October 10th, David now sleeps in the hidden room. He asks when he can play outside. I lie and tell him soon. October 15th, they cut our electricity. They cut the phone line. Robert says we must hold firm. October 18th, there are trucks circling tonight. They're surrounding the house. Robert is going down to be with David. I have to keep them safe. October 19th, 3 a.m. They broke in. I heard Robert scream. They're searching for us. David is below. If someone finds this, remember us, Martha Hartley. The entry ended abruptly, the pen stroke trailing into a frantic smear. Amelia closed the notebook, her heart aching. Lily had found a tin container under the bed. Inside, folded meticulously, were documents, birth certificates, letters, a list of names with dates beside them. Several names were violently crossed out in red ink. 4 names remained untouched. James Blackwood, Harold Wilson, Thomas Reed, Michael Crawford. These are the people who made the family disappear, Amelia whispered. Frank stared at the names. Wilson was the police chief in 1971. Reed was a local judge. Blackwood ran the bank. Crawford was the town council president. They're all connected. And they're all dead now, but their children, Frank's jaw clenched. Their children are still here, still in power. Amelia photographed every page, every document, every inch of the room. This wasn't just a hidden space, it was evidence, a preserved crime scene that had waited 52 years for someone to find it. Lily held up a Polaroid photograph they found tucked into the diary, a family standing in front of this very house. A tall man with kind eyes, a woman with a warm smile, and between them a boy with dark hair and gap-toothed grin. Their faces intact, their expressions full of life and hope. "This is them," Lily said softly, before everything went bad. Amelia took the photo, studying the faces of Robert, Martha, and David Hartley. Ordinary people who'd been destroyed by greed and power, and a 7-year-old boy who'd hidden in this room, listening to his parents die. "What happened to David?" Lily asked. "He's not here." Frank's expression darkened. "The diary says they were searching for him. The note from Martha says to remember them, but there's no indication of what happened after." Amelia looked around the room again. The bed too small for anyone but a child. The toys arranged carefully. The painted stars watching over an empty space. Somewhere David Hartley had either died that night or... "He survived," Lily said suddenly. "He got out. Someone found him." "How do you know?" "Because otherwise his body would be here. And it's not." Lily touched the quilt gently. "Someone found David, and if he survived, we can find him." Frank and Amelia exchanged a glance. The girl was right. If David had died in this room, his remains would still be here. But the room was empty except for his things. "Then where is he?" Frank whispered. "We'll find out." Amelia gathered the documents, the diary, the photograph. "But first, we need to get this evidence somewhere safe, and we need to talk to someone who can help us investigate properly." They emerged from the hidden room as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. The house felt different now, less like a forgotten place and more like a witness. It had kept its secrets for 52 years, waiting for someone to listen. As they packed up to leave, Lily turned back to look at the house one more time. "I promise we'll tell your story," she said quietly. "All of you." Amelia put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Whatever they'd started couldn't be undone. The truth was coming, whether the powerful families of this town wanted it or not. The building that housed the Chronicle Herald sat on a narrow street 40 miles from the house, wedged between a barber shop and a tax preparation office. Daniel Reeves worked from the second floor, where peeling linoleum and humming fluorescent lights spoke to decades of underfunding. Amelia had found his name through internet searches. Investigative journalist, 25 years covering local corruption, government malfeasance, unsolved disappearances. His articles had a reputation for meticulous research and uncomfortable truths. The receptionist looked up when they entered. "You have an appointment?" "No, but I have information about a 52-year-old murder that was covered up by local officials." The woman's eyebrows rose. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then gestured toward a hallway. "Third door on the left." Daniel Reeves' body stood when they entered his office. 55 years old, graying at the temples, wearing a shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. His desk drowned under stacks of papers, file folders, coffee-stained notebooks. A bulletin board covered one wall, pinned with photographs, maps, articles in overlapping layers. "I'm Amelia Kirsten. This is my daughter Lily and Frank Morrison." Reeves shook hands, his grip firm. His eyes moved from Amelia to Frank with recognition. "Morrison, your father built half the houses in this county, including the Hartley house." Something flickered across Reeves' face. "I know that name. Family that disappeared in 97 when police said they relocated voluntarily." "They didn't relocate." Amelia placed the tin container on his desk. "They were murdered, and we found the evidence." For the next hour, they laid it out. The hidden room, Martha's diary, the list of names, the note written in her final moments. Reeves listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When Lily showed him the Polaroid of the Hartley family, his expression hardened. "Do you understand what you're telling me? 4 of the most powerful men in this region at the time, all involved in murder? We're telling you because we need help. Frank's voice was steady. Their children still run this town. We can't go to local police. We need someone who can investigate properly and protect the evidence. Reeves leaned back in his chair. I've heard rumors about the Hartley case for years. No one would talk on record. People were too scared or too ashamed. He looked at Lily. How old are you, sweetheart? 9. And you're not frightened by this? Lily met his gaze. David Hartley was 7. Someone needs to speak for him. Reeves studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're right, someone does. He turned to Amelia. This is dangerous. If these families have maintained power for 5 decades, they won't let you expose their father's crimes without a fight. We know someone's already tried to scare us off. Then we need to be smart. Document everything. Find witnesses who will go on record. Build a case so strong they can't suppress it. Reeves stood, pulling files from a cabinet. I've kept notes on every suspicious disappearance in this region from 1969 to 1975. At least 5 other families relocated under similar circumstances. All owned valuable land. Amelia felt the scope expanding. Not just one family, a pattern of elimination. They spent the afternoon planning. Reeves would reach out to his contacts at the state attorney general's office. Frank would try to find other residents from 1971 who might remember details. Amelia would research property records and land transfers. Lily asked if she could help too. You have good eyes, Reeves told her. Sometimes kids notice things adults miss. If you're at the house, keep looking. You found that diary. You might find more. They drove back as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Frank followed in his truck. He'd decided to stay at the house full-time now, sleeping in the downstairs bedroom. Safety in numbers. Over the next 3 days, they fell into a routine. Adults spent mornings interviewing elderly residents or digging through county archives. Afternoons, they returned to the house, where Lily explored while Frank checked structural concerns and Amelia cataloged findings. Each night, they compared notes, building a timeline of October 1971. On the 4th day, while Amelia and Frank were meeting with a former postal worker who delivered mail to the Hartley house, Lily made her second discovery. She'd been examining the living room floor, looking for more hidden compartments. Most of the boards were solid, but near the corner by the fireplace, one section gave slightly under her weight. She called Frank's cell phone. Can you come back? I think I found something. 30 minutes later, Frank worked a crowbar under the loose boards while Lily documented with her camera. Beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal box. Inside, 2 cassette tapes labeled in Robert Hartley's handwriting and a CD-ROM in a plastic case. 1971, Frank breathed. CD-ROMs were brand new technology then. Expensive. Rare. He was documenting everything, Amelia realized, building his own evidence. They drove immediately to Reeves' office. He had equipment to play both formats. They started with the first cassette. Robert's voice emerged from the speakers, tinny but clear. This is Robert Hartley, October 15th, 1971. I'm recording this conversation with Thomas Reed, who's standing in my living room right now. A second voice, cultured and cold. Robert, you're making this harder than it needs to be. The highway project is approved. Your land is in the path. We're offering fair compensation. Fair? You're offering 1/3 of what it's worth, and I know the city council members are getting kickbacks from the construction company. That's a serious accusation. I have bank records. I've seen the deposits. Reed's voice hardened. Then you're a very foolish man. If you won't sign, we'll take the land anyway. One way or another. Are you threatening me in my own home? I'm stating facts. This is your last chance. Sign the papers, take the money, relocate your family, or face the consequences. Get out of my house. You'll regret this, Robert. The recording ended. The second tape was similar, a conversation with Harold Wilson, the police chief, who made thinly veiled threats about accidents and unfortunate incidents befalling families who caused trouble. The CD-ROM contained one large audio file. Reeves pulled it up on his computer. The timestamp showed October 19th, 1971, 11:47 p.m. The recording began with distant sounds, vehicles approaching, car doors slamming, then closer, heavy footsteps on the porch. Pounding on the front door. Harold Wilson's voice, loud and authoritative. Robert Hartley, open this door. More pounding, then the sound of wood splintering as the door was forced open. Multiple sets of boots on floorboards. Robert's voice, shaking but defiant. You have no warrant. Get out of my house. You had your chance. Wilson again. Where's the bike, eh? What boy? Don't play stupid. Where's David? Martha's voice in the background, high with panic. Leave us alone. We didn't do anything. The sounds that followed were chaotic. Furniture crashing. Martha screaming. A struggle. Then Thomas Reed's voice, breathing hard. Take them to the truck. Make sure there's no trace. Michael Crawford's voice for the first time. What about the kid? We need to find him. Wilson saw, search the house. Tear it apart if you have to. More crashing and doors being kicked open. Footsteps overhead. Then, after several minutes, James Blackwood's voice. He's not here. Must have run into the woods. Crawford. We can't leave loose ends. Wilson. We'll find him. He's 7 years old. How far can he get in the dark? Reed. If he talks, he won't. Wilson's voice was final. We'll find him, put him in the system with a new identity. A kid that traumatized won't remember anything. Problem solved. The recording continued for another minute, capturing them loading the Hartleys into vehicles, discussing where to dispose of bodies, how to stage the scene as a voluntary departure. Then the house fell silent except for the hum of the recording device Robert had hidden. Lily had been sitting very still throughout the playback. Now she looked up, her face pale. They killed them. No one contradicted her. Reeves stopped the recording. The silence in his office felt thick enough to choke on. Frank spoke first, his voice raw. That's murder. Premeditated, on tape. With 4 prominent citizens clearly identified. Reeves's hands moved over his keyboard, copying the files. This changes everything. This is admissible evidence. Amelia's mind raced. They said they'd find David and put him in the system with a new identity, which means he might still be alive. Reeves was already searching databases. If they found him that night and funneled him into foster care, there would be records, probably falsified, but records nonetheless. Over the next 2 hours, Reeves used his press credentials and cultivated contacts to access adoption and foster care records from late 1971. They found him buried in the data, a 7-year-old boy, no name listed, admitted to state custody November 3, 1971. Origin marked as unknown. Medical notes indicated severe psychological trauma, selective mutism, no memory of his identity. The boy had been placed with a foster family in March 1972. Adoption finalized in June. New name, Jonathan Miller. Last known address, Portland, Oregon. That's him. Frank's voice shook. That's David. Lily touched the screen gently. He's alive. David's alive. If this is accurate, he's 59 years old now. Reeves pulled up property records, cross-referencing the name. Jonathan Miller, architect, lives in Northeast Portland. Married, 2 children. Does he know? Amelia asked quietly. Does he remember what happened? Only one way to find out. Before they could plan their next move, Amelia's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Mrs. Kirsten? A man's voice, smooth and cold. My name is Richard Crawford. I believe you have been making inquiries about my late father. Amelia's stomach dropped. She put the phone on speaker. I have nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could have a civil conversation about your recent purchase. Crawford's tone remained pleasant, but something predatory lurked beneath. The Hartley house. Fascinating choice. Though I understand the structure is quite unstable. Dangerous even. Is that a threat? Simply an observation. Old houses can be treacherous, especially for families with young children. Frank leaned forward. Crawford, this is Frank Morrison. You might remember my father built that house. A pause. Morrison, of course, your father did excellent work. Pity about your son, though. Michael, wasn't it? Such a tragedy. Well, Frank's hands clenched into fists. Crawford continued, I'd hate to see more tragedy befall good people. Mrs. Kirsten, I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you triple what you paid for that property. You can take the money, relocate somewhere safer, give your daughter a better life. We're not selling. Then perhaps we should meet, face to face. I'm standing outside the Chronicle Herald right now. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Reeves looked out the window. A black sedan idled at the curb. He nodded to Amelia. Fine, I'll be right down. She hung up. Frank immediately objected. Don't go alone. I won't. We all go. Downstairs, Richard Crawford stood beside the sedan. 60 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. Two younger men flanked him, lawyers probably, or hired muscle. When Amelia stepped out with Frank, Reeves, and Lily, his expression tightened. You brought the child. My daughter has every right to hear this conversation. Crawford studied Lily with visible distaste. Very well. Mrs. Kirsten, let me be direct. You've stumbled into a complicated situation involving matters you don't understand. I understand your father was part of a group that murdered the Hartley family and stole their land. Crawford's pleasant mask slipped. My father is dead. He can't defend himself against wild accusations. We have evidence. Evidence can be misinterpreted, witnesses can be mistaken, and sometimes people who dig too deeply find themselves in legal trouble. He produced a document from his briefcase. Civil suit for defamation. Filed this morning against you, Frank Morrison, and Daniel Reeves. We're seeking damages of $2 million. Reeves took the papers, scanning quickly. This won't hold up. Perhaps not, but it will tie you up in court for years, cost you tens of thousands in legal fees. And while you're defending yourselves, I'll be filing complaints with Child Protective Services about the unsafe environment you're exposing your daughter to. Amelia felt ice flood her veins. You're threatening to take my child? I'm concerned about a minor being involved in dangerous activities, living in a structurally unsound building, being exposed to traumatic historical material. Any judge would have questions. Lily stepped forward, her voice steady. You're trying to scare us because you're afraid. Afraid people will know what your father did. Crawford looked at her with something approaching contempt. Little girl, you don't understand how the world works. Your mother is making a mistake. When adults make mistakes, children suffer the consequences. Frank moved between Crawford and Lily. You need to leave. Now. I'll leave, but understand this. My family has maintained its position in this community for generations. We have resources, connections, influence. If you proceed with this crusade, you will lose everything. Your house, your reputation, possibly your daughter. He looked directly at Amelia Barbon. This is your last chance to walk away quietly. We're not walking away. Amelia's voice didn't waver. David Hartley deserves justice. His parents deserve to be remembered, and your father deserves to have his crimes exposed. Crawford's face hardened. Then you've made your choice. Don't say I didn't warn you. He climbed into the sedan. As it pulled away, Lily grabbed Amelia's hand, trembling now that the confrontation was over. He's really scary, Mom. I know, baby, but we're not alone, and we're not backing down. That night, they stayed at Frank's house, a modest ranch home 3 miles from the Hartley property. Frank insisted they couldn't go back to the house until they had better security measures. Amelia called her mother, explaining in vague terms that she and Lily needed to stay out of town for a few days. She hated lying, but the truth would only terrify her. Reeves worked late into the night writing the first article. He sent drafts for Amelia and Frank to review. The headline, 52 Years of Silence, The Hartley Family Mystery Reopens. The article laid out the basic facts, the disappearance, the recently discovered hidden room, Martha's diary excerpts, though not the most damning ones yet, and the questions that had haunted the community for decades. Reeves deliberately didn't name the 4 men involved. Not yet. He wanted to draw out witnesses first, people who might feel any speaking now that the story was public. The article went live the next morning. Within hours, the newspaper's phone lines were overwhelmed. Comments flooded the website. Some people claimed to have heard rumors about the Hartley case for years. Others shared stories of other families who'd mysteriously relocated around the same time. A few messages were hostile, accusing Reeves of sensationalism, but most expressed shock and demanded answers. By afternoon, Margaret Sullivan called the paper. She was 82 years old, had lived next door to the Hartleys in 1971. She'd never spoken publicly about what she witnessed, but now, she said, she was ready. Reeves arranged a meeting at her assisted living facility. Amelia, Frank, and Lily went with him. Margaret sat in a chair by her window, hands folded in her lap, eyes sharp despite her age. I've waited a long time for someone to ask the right questions. Lily sat near her, quiet and attentive. Margaret looked at her and smiled sadly. You remind me of my own granddaughter, brave girl. She turned to Amelia. You want to know about October 19th, 1971? Anything you remember. Margaret's gaze went distant. I remember everything. It was a Thursday night, cold. My husband and I were getting ready for bed when we heard engines. 3 trucks, maybe 4. Big ones pulling up to the Hartley house. I looked out the window. Men got out, went to the door. I heard pounding, then the door breaking. Did you see who they were? Some of them. The porch light was on. I recognized Harold Wilson, he was police chief. And Thomas Reed, I'd seen his picture in the paper. There were others I didn't know. Her hands tightened. I heard Martha screaming. Just once, then quiet. What did you do? I wanted to call for help. I reached for the phone. My husband grabbed my arm, told me to put it down. He said those were powerful men. If we interfered, we'd end up like the Hartleys. Margaret's voice broke. I listened to him. I stayed at that window and watched them carry things out to the trucks. Bodies, I think, wrapped in tarps. Then they went back and on, and I heard crashing, like they were searching for something. Did you see David, the boy? No. But about an hour later, I saw a small figure run from the trees behind the house. Just a glimpse. I think it was him. I think he'd been hiding in the woods. She wiped her eyes. The next morning, police came by asking questions. Wilson himself. He told us the Hartleys had decided to move suddenly, family emergency, didn't want to disturb anyone with goodbyes. He made it very clear we should tell people the same story if they asked. And you did. For 52 years, I did. My husband died 20 years ago, still carrying that secret. It ate at him. She looked directly at Amelia. I've lived with the guilt every day since. I should have called for help. I should have testified. But I was frightened. Lily reached out and took Margaret's hand. You're testifying now. That's what matters. Margaret squeezed her fingers gently. You're a remarkable child. David would be about my age now if he survived. I hope he did. I hope someone found him and gave him a good life. We think we know where he is. Amelia explained about the adoption records, about Jonathan Miller in Portland. Margaret's eyes widened. You found him? After all this time? We found the name. We haven't contacted him yet. You must. That poor boy deserves to know the truth. Deserves to know his parents loved him enough to die protecting him. They left Margaret's facility with her statement recorded and notarized. Reeves had what he needed for the follow-up article, but first they needed to contact Jonathan Miller. Frank made the call from his living room that evening, putting it on speaker. They'd agreed he should do it. Something about his voice, steady and paternal, might be less alarming than a stranger calling with impossible claims. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. Hello? A man's voice, cautious. Is this Jonathan Miller? Who's asking? My name is Frank Morrison. I'm calling from Oregon. I'm calling about Oregon, about your adoption in 1972. Long silence, then, I don't discuss my adoption. Mr. Miller, please don't hang up. This is important, life-changing important. We believe we've found information about your biological family. Another pause. I was told there were no records, that I was found with no identification. That's what they wanted you to believe, but it wasn't true. Frank's voice gentled. Your name was David, David Hartley. Your parents were Robert and Martha, and they loved you very much. The sound of breathing on the other end, then barely a whisper. How do you know this? Because we found the room where you hid. We found your mother's diary. We found evidence of what happened the night they died. They're dead? The voice cracked. Yes, I'm so sorry, but they died protecting you. And we think it's time the world knew what happened to your family. Jonathan David was silent for so long that Frank thought the call had disconnected. Finally, I need time to process this. Can you send me what you found? Of course. And if you want to come here to see the house, to learn the full story, I'll think about it. Another pause. The house. I've dreamed about a house in the woods my whole life, a room underground. I thought it was just nightmares. It wasn't nightmares. It was memory. After the call ended, they sat in silence. Lily was crying quietly, and Amelia held her. Frank stared at the phone as if it might offer more answers. He's going to come, Lily said. I know he will. Reeves published the second article 2 days later. This one included Margaret's testimony, details about the audio recordings, and the revelation that David Hartley might still be alive. The story exploded. National news outlets picked it up. CNN called requesting interviews. The state attorney general's office announced a formal investigation into the 1971 disappearances and potential corruption in local law enforcement. The pressure on the Crawford, Wilson, Reed, and Blackwood families became immense. Peter Reed, Thomas Reed's son, issued a statement through his lawyer claiming his father had never mentioned the Hartley case. David Wilson, now the current police chief, recused himself from any involvement in the investigation. James Blackwood Jr. refused all comment. But Richard Crawford doubled down, calling a press conference to denounce the allegations as historical slander against men who can't defend themselves. During Crawford's press conference, a reporter asked about the audio recordings. Crawford claimed they were fabricated, that modern technology could fake anything, but his voice shook slightly, and his eyes kept darting to someone off camera. The cracks were showing. 3 days after the second article, Jonathan Miller called back. I'm coming to Oregon. I need to see that house. He arrived on a Tuesday morning. Amelia picked him up from the regional airport, a small terminal 90 minutes from the house. She recognized him immediately. 59 years old, graying hair, cautious eyes. But in his face, she could see the 7-year-old boy from the Polaroid photograph. Mr. Miller. Jonathan is fine. He shook her hand. This is surreal. I can imagine there's a lot to process. Lily was in the back seat. Jonathan noticed her and smiled slightly. You must be Lily. Frank mentioned you on the phone. I found your mother's diary and your room. His smile faded. My room, I still can't believe it's real. The drive to the house passed in relative quiet. Jonathan stared out the window, occasionally asking about the area, about how long Amelia had lived here, about mundane things that kept the bigger questions at bay. But as they approached the familiar gravel clearing, his breathing changed. That's it. Not a question, a recognition. Frank was waiting on the porch. He'd spent the morning making sure the structure was safe, that the hidden room was accessible. When Jonathan got out of the car, Frank stepped forward and offered his hand. My son Michael talked about you all the time. After you disappeared, he never stopped asking when you'd come back. Jonathan's eyes filled. Michael, I remember him. We built things in the woods. You were best friends. They stood facing each other, two men connected by a tragedy that had rippled through 5 decades. Then Frank pulled Jonathan into an embrace, and Jonathan broke, sobbing against the older man's shoulder. Eventually, they went inside. Jonathan moved through the rooms like someone walking through a dream. His fingers traced the mantel of the fireplace, the windowsill in the kitchen, the banister of the stairs. At the second-floor bedroom, he stopped. The wardrobe. I remember this. Frank had left it pushed aside, the hidden door visible. Jonathan approached slowly. Amelia had expected him to need prompting, but he moved with certainty, opening the door, descending the narrow stairs. They followed him down. He stood in the center of the small room, turning slowly. His gaze moved from the painted stars to the toys on the shelf to the small bed. He picked up the wooden horse, running his thumb over the carved mane. My father made this. He was teaching me woodworking. Lily had brought the diary. She held it out. Your mother wrote about you every day. Jonathan took it with trembling hands. He sat on the bed and began to read. Amelia, Frank, and Lily quietly withdrew, giving him privacy. They waited upstairs, listening to the silence below. After an hour, Jonathan emerged. His eyes were red, but his face held something like peace. I remember now. Not everything, but enough. I remember hiding down there, hearing noises above. My mother's voice telling me to stay quiet. Then silence. Hours of silence. I thought maybe they had left to get help, that they'd come back for me. His voice steadied. In the morning, I heard footsteps, men in searching. I stayed quiet like Mom said. Eventually, they left. I waited until it was dark again before I climbed out. I ran into the woods. I don't know how long I was out there. Days, maybe. Then someone found me, I think a state trooper. They took me to a hospital. I didn't talk. Couldn't talk. Everything felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. They changed your name, Frank said gently. Told me I was starting over. That my old life was gone and I needed to let it go. I was 7. I believed them, but the dreams never stopped. The room underground, the painted stars, my mother's voice. He looked at Amelia. You gave me back my past. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank us. You needed to know the truth. Over the next few days, Jonathan stayed at Frank's house. DNA tests were conducted using items from the hidden room, confirming what they already knew. Jonathan Miller was David Hartley. The news sent shockwaves through media coverage. The story was no longer about historical crime. It was about a survivor returning to reclaim his stolen identity. Reeves organized a press conference. Jonathan agreed to speak publicly. He stood at a podium flanked by Amelia, Frank, and his attorney, with Lily seated in the front row. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Jonathan's voice was quiet but firm. My name is David Hartley. My parents, Robert and Martha Hartley, were murdered on October 19th, 1971 by 4 men who wanted their land. Those men used their power to cover up their crime and erase my family from history. But history doesn't stay buried forever. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Reeves played excerpts from the audio recordings. The room fell silent as the voices of Harold Wilson, Thomas Reed, Michael Crawford, and James Blackwood echoed through the speakers, calmly discussing murder and cover-up. When the recordings ended, David continued. For 52 years, I lived with fragments of memory I didn't understand. Now I know the truth. My parents died protecting me. They hid me in a room my friend's grandfather built, and they gave their lives so I might survive. I'm here today to ensure they're finally remembered, to ensure justice, even if delayed, is finally served. A reporter called out, "What do you want to happen to the families of these men?" I want accountability. I want the land stolen from my family returned. I want the world to know what Robert and Martha Hartley stood for. Ordinary people who refused to be bullied by those in power, even when it cost them everything. The press conference lasted an hour. Afterward, David stood with Lily, looking at the Polaroid photograph she'd brought. I'm glad you found this. I have no other pictures of them. You can keep it. Are you sure? Lily nodded. It belongs to you. It always did. David knelt down to her level. You know, if I'd had a daughter, I would have wanted her to be like you. Brave, kind, unwilling to let injustice stand. Your parents were like that too. That's why they fought. Yes, they were. That evening, as they prepared to leave Frank's house, Amelia's phone rang. Richard Crawford. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Kirsten. His voice had changed. The smoothness was gone, replaced by something hollow. I saw the press conference. And? I underestimated you, all of you. A long pause. My father, I knew he was involved in land deals that weren't entirely legal. I didn't know about the Hartleys. Didn't know it went that far. Does it matter now? It matters to me. I'm 60 years old. I've spent my life benefiting from something built on murder. Another pause. I can't fix what my father did, but I won't fight you anymore. The civil suit has been withdrawn. I've instructed my legal team to cooperate with investigators. Amelia didn't know what to say. Crawford continued. Tell David Hartley I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but tell him anyway. He hung up before she could respond. She relayed the conversation to the others. Frank shook his head. An apology doesn't bring back the dead. No, David said quietly, but it's a start. Outside, the sun was setting over the forest. Somewhere in those trees, a 7-year-old boy had hidden and survived. Somewhere in this town, 4 men had believed their power made them untouchable. But truth, David had said, has a way of surfacing. And justice, however delayed, was finally beginning. The week following David's press conference brought an avalanche of attention. Network news vans lined the streets near Frank's house. Reporters camped outside the Hartley property. The Attorney General's office announced a grand jury investigation into historical corruption and obstruction of justice. Frank installed security cameras at both properties, and a state trooper was assigned to provide protection for Amelia, Lily, and David. Through it all, Lily kept returning to Martha's diary. She'd read it so many times she'd memorized entire passages, but something nagged at her. Late one evening, while the adults discussed legal strategy in Frank's living room, she sat cross-legged on her bed with the diary open under lamplight. She'd noticed earlier that some pages felt thicker than others, as if something had been pressed between them. On the entry for October 18th, she carefully separated the pages. A thin sheet of paper, folded small, had been tucked into the spine. The handwriting was shakier than Martha's usual script, written in pencil rather than ink. David isn't alone tonight. Sarah, the Sullivan girl from next door, came running to our house at sunset. She said her parents were fighting, and she was scared. I couldn't send her home. Not tonight. She's sleeping in the hidden room with David. If something happens to us, someone needs to know there were 2 children here. Lily's heart hammered. She ran into the living room, holding the diary open. There was another kid in the room with David. The adults fell silent. David leaned forward, his face pale. Another child? Sarah Sullivan, your neighbor's daughter. Lily showed them the note. She was hiding with you that night. Frank grabbed his phone, pulling up contact information. Margaret Sullivan, we interviewed her. She's the neighbor who witnessed the trucks. Could Sarah be her daughter? Margaret answered on the 3rd ring. When Frank asked about her daughter, the old woman's voice cracked. Sarah, yes, she was there that night. At the Hartley house? She'd run over because my husband and I were arguing. Martha took her in. The next morning, those men brought her back. They told us if we ever spoke about what she'd seen, they'd take her away permanently. Said she'd end up in foster care with no records, just like they were doing with the Hartley boy. Margaret's breath caught. Sarah remembered everything, but we made her promise never to tell. She's lived with that silence for 52 years. Where is she now? Portland. She's a teacher, elementary school, never married. I think the trauma... Margaret stopped. I'll give you her number, but please be gentle. This has haunted her whole life. Sarah Sullivan answered hesitantly when Amelia called the next morning. She was 59, the same age as David. Her voice had the careful modulation of someone who'd spent decades controlling her emotions. I saw the news about David Hartley. I've been waiting for someone to contact me. You were there, in the hidden room. I was. A long exhale. I've wanted to speak up for so long, but my parents made me swear. They were terrified. They don't need to be afraid anymore. We have evidence, recordings, David's testimony. Yours would complete the picture. When do you need me? 2 days later, Sarah Sullivan drove down from Portland. She was thin and reserved, with worried eyes that seemed to take in everything. When she saw David for the first time in Frank's living room, they stared at each other for a long moment. Then she crossed the space and embraced him. I've dreamed about you my whole life. Wondered if you made it out. David's voice was thick. I dreamed about you too. I couldn't remember your name, but I remembered someone else was there. Someone who held my hand in the dark. They sat together while Sarah recounted her story for Reeves' recorder. Lily listened from the couch, Amelia's arm around her shoulders. I was 9. My parents were fighting, something about money, I think. I ran out of the house and went to the Hartleys. When Hartley answered the door, she could see I'd been crying. She didn't ask questions, just brought me inside and said I could stay as long as I needed. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. That evening, Mr. Hartley seemed agitated. He kept looking out the windows. Mrs. Hartley took David and me upstairs. She showed us the hidden room and said we were going to have an adventure, like camping. She made it sound fun, but I could hear fear in her voice. What happened after you went down? Mrs. Hartley stayed with us for a while. She read us a story. Then Mr. Hartley called her upstairs. Before she left, she knelt down and looked at both of us. She said, Sarah's voice broke. She said no matter what we heard, we had to stay quiet and stay hidden, that someone would come for us when it was safe. David reached for her hand. We heard crashes, shouting, Mrs. Hartley screaming. David started to cry, and I put my hand over his mouth, whispering that we had to be quiet like his mom said. The sounds went on forever, then silence. We stayed in that room all night. Neither of us slept. In the morning, we heard men searching the house, heavy footsteps overhead, doors slamming. At one point, someone tried the wardrobe, but the bolts held. How did they find you? Late morning, the police came. Real police, I thought. Chief Wilson opened the hidden door and found us. He seemed surprised there were two of us. He took us upstairs. The house was destroyed, furniture overturned, everything searched. Wilson made a phone call. Then he drove us in his patrol car to my house. Her face hardened. He told my parents there'd been an incident, that the Hartleys had been involved in criminal activity and fled, that Sarah had been present but was unharmed. Then he looked at me and said very clearly, "You were never at that house last night. You were home sleeping. Do you understand?" I was 9. I nodded. My parents nodded. And that was that. You saw the men who came that night? 4 of them. I recognized Wilson from seeing him around town. There was a well-dressed man. I learned later it was Judge Reed, a banker who'd come to our house once about a loan, Blackwood, and an older man I didn't know, Crawford. They were all there when Wilson brought us upstairs. Reeves looked at his notes. You'd testify to this under oath? I'd testify in front of the entire world. I should have done it 52 years ago. She turned to David. I'm sorry, I should have spoken up. We were children. They terrified us into silence. David squeezed her hand. But we're not children anymore. Peter Reed, Thomas Reed's son, requested a meeting 2 weeks later. He came alone to Frank's house, a man in his early 60s carrying a leather portfolio. His face bore the weight of sleepless nights. I want to cooperate fully with the investigation. I've already turned over my father's personal papers to the Attorney General. But there's something else. He opened the portfolio, removing a hand-drawn map. My father kept this in a safe deposit box. I found it after he died. I didn't understand what it was until your articles came out. The map showed the forest surrounding the Hartley property with a location marked 5 miles northwest. Grid coordinates, depth measurements, notes in Thomas Reed's handwriting. November 1971, deep enough, clay soil holds. Frank studied it, his face grim. This is where they buried Robert and Martha. I believe so. My father never spoke of it directly, but when he was dying, cancer, very painful, he talked in his sleep. He kept saying, too deep to find. I didn't understand then. Peter's jaw worked. I can't undo what my father did, but I can help bring the Hartleys home. The excavation began 3 days later. State investigators, forensic anthropologists, cadaver dogs. The site was on land that had belonged to Michael Crawford's estate, now owned by a conservation trust after Crawford's death. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Amelia brought Lily to the site, staying behind the police tape. David stood with Frank and Sarah Sullivan, the 3 of them holding hands as excavators worked carefully through layers of earth. The process took hours. News helicopters circled overhead. As the sun began its descent, one of the forensic team members called out. The digging stopped. Everyone moved closer. 2 wrapped bundles, deteriorated fabric barely holding together, lay in the clay soil exactly where Peter Reed's map indicated. David's knees gave out. Frank caught him, holding him upright. Sarah wept openly. Lily pressed her face against Amelia's side, unable to watch but unable to look away. The remains were carefully removed, transported to the state crime lab. DNA testing would take weeks, but no one doubted the results. Robert and Martha Hartley had been found. That night, David sat in the Hartley house for the first time since childhood. He'd avoided it until now, but after finding his parents, he needed to be there. Frank, Amelia, and Lily accompanied him. They sat in the living room where the fire had once burned, where family photographs had hung on walls, where ordinary life had unfolded until violence shattered it. They fought for this place, for the principle of it. David's voice echoed in the empty space. They could have taken the money and left, but they believed in standing up to corruption, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost them their lives. Lily moved to sit beside him. They protected you. That's what parents do. Your mother protects you too. I see it in how she looks at you, how she put herself between you and Crawford. He smiled slightly. My mother would have liked her. I wish I could have met them. You did, in a way. You found their story. You gave them their voices back. That's a kind of meeting. The DNA results confirmed the remains 3 weeks later. The medical examiner's report was stark. Blunt force trauma to both victims, consistent with assault using metal implements. Death would have occurred within minutes. The findings were released publicly, cementing what the audio recordings had already proven. The grand jury returned indictments, not against the dead men, who were beyond justice, but against their estates and against those who'd helped cover up the crimes. David Wilson, the current police chief and Harold Wilson's son, was charged with obstruction for destroying records related to the case. James Blackwood Jr. faced charges related to money laundering that traced back to the original land deals. Richard Crawford and Peter Reed were not charged criminally, but faced massive civil liability. The trial began in early autumn, almost a year after Amelia had first bought the house. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses. Margaret Sullivan testified about what she'd seen from her window. Sarah Sullivan described being in the hidden room, hearing Martha's screams, and being threatened into silence by Wilson. Frank spoke about his father's knowledge and his own son's death. Daniel Reeves presented the timeline of cover-up and corruption. And then Lily was called to testify. Amelia had fought against it, but the prosecutor convinced her that Lily's testimony, how she'd discovered the hidden compartments, how she'd approached the investigation with clear eyes unclouded by adult fears, would be powerful. Lily had agreed immediately. She wanted to help. The courtroom fell silent when she approached the witness stand. 10 years old now, wearing a dress Amelia had bought specifically for this day, she looked impossibly small in the wooden chair. The judge smiled at her gently and asked if she understood she needed to tell the truth. Yes, sir, always. The prosecutor began with simple questions. How had she found the house? What made her look for hidden spaces? Lily answered clearly, her voice steady. I kept thinking about David. He was 7, younger than me. If he was scared enough to hide, he would have looked for the smallest, safest place. So I looked for places like that, under floorboards, behind furniture, in corners no one notices. And you found the diary? In a secret drawer by the fireplace. Mrs. Hartley hid it there so someone would find it someday. She wanted the truth known, even if she didn't survive to tell it herself. The prosecutor showed her the diary, already entered as evidence. Is this what you found? Yes. Reading her words, it was like she was talking to me across time, asking me to help, so I kept looking. You also found other materials, recordings, documents. Why did you keep searching? Lily looked directly at the jury. Because David Hartley deserved to know what happened to his parents. Because Mrs. Hartley wrote, "Please remember us," and I couldn't let her be forgotten. Because when bad people do bad things, someone has to stand up and say it was wrong, even if it happened a long time ago. She paused. My mom taught me that truth matters more than being comfortable, even when truth is hard. In the gallery, David wiped his eyes. Richard Crawford sat with his legal team, staring at his hands. The defense attorneys had no questions for Lily. What could they ask that wouldn't make them look like they were bullying a child? David testified next, describing his recovered memories, the trauma of losing his identity, the decades of fractured dreams that finally made sense. Sarah corroborated every detail. The audio recordings played again, filling the courtroom with the voices of dead men casually discussing murder. The final witness was David himself, in a different capacity. The prosecutor asked him to speak directly to the defendants about the impact of their father's crimes and their own complicity in maintaining silence. David stood facing the defense table. Richard Crawford, David Wilson, James Blackwood Jr. You didn't pull the triggers, if there were triggers. You didn't plan the murders, but you lived your entire lives benefiting from those murders. You inherited wealth and power built on my parents' graves. And when the truth started emerging, your first instinct wasn't justice or remorse. It was to protect yourselves and your family names. Richard Crawford looked up, meeting David's eyes for the first time. Some truths arrive late, but they still arrive. My parents believed that standing against corruption mattered. Even at great cost, they were right. And now, 52 years later, their stand is vindicated. Not because justice is efficient, but because some people refuse to let their deaths be forgotten. He looked at Lily. Sometimes those people are children brave enough to look in dark places and demand light. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They returned guilty verdicts on multiple counts of obstruction, evidence tampering, and criminal conspiracy to conceal felonies. David Wilson was sentenced to 5 years. James Blackwood Jr. received 3 years and substantial fines. The civil judgments were staggering. The combined estates and defendants were ordered to pay David Hartley $15 million in damages, the value of the stolen land, plus compensation for a lifetime of trauma and loss of family. Additionally, the court ordered the original Hartley property and all parcels acquired through the 1971 land grab to be returned to David's name. A victim compensation fund was established for other families who'd been displaced. Outside the courthouse, David stood at a podium surrounded by Amelia, Frank, Sarah, and Lily. Reporters shouted questions. Camera shutters clicked like rainfall. Today isn't about revenge, it's about acknowledgement. For 52 years, my parents existed only in my fragmentary nightmares. Now they exist in the public record as people who stood for something, as people who loved their son enough to hide him in a room underground, knowing they might not survive the night. His voice strengthened. They taught me, in the few years I had with them, that principles matter, that you don't compromise with evil, even when it wears a suit and carries a badge. I only wish I'd remembered those lessons sooner. A reporter called out, "What will you do with the house?" David glanced at Amelia. They discussed this extensively. The house will become a memorial and educational center. The Hartley House, a place where visitors can learn about corruption, resistance, and the importance of speaking truth to power. The hidden room will be preserved exactly as my mother created it, because that room represents something essential. That even in our darkest moments, humans create sanctuaries for those we love. The memorial service for Robert and Martha was held on a clear Saturday morning in late October, exactly 1 year after Amelia had first bought the house. Their remains, finally released by the state, were to be interred in the town cemetery under a simple stone David had designed. The service drew hundreds. Local residents who remembered the family, activists who saw the Hartleys as symbols of resistance, families of other victims from the 1971 land grab, students from the school where Sarah taught, journalists who'd covered the story, people who'd never known the Hartleys but felt compelled to witness justice finally served. Frank arrived early, wearing a suit that looked like it hadn't been out of the closet in years. He carried a framed photograph of his son Michael, 7 years old, gap-toothed grin, standing next to a boy who could only be David Hartley. They'd found the picture in Frank's attic during the trial preparations. "Thought Michael should be here," Frank said when David saw it. "He never stopped looking for you. In a way, he brought us all together." David's eyes filled. "He did. I only wish he'd lived to see this." "He knows. Somehow I think he knows." Sarah arrived with Margaret, her mother now walking with a cane, but determined to attend. Margaret had testified at the trial, her voice strong despite her age. Now she moved slowly toward the gravesite, supported by her daughter. Amelia and Lily were among the last to arrive. Lily carried something wrapped in cloth, the wooden horse from the hidden room. David had asked if she wanted to place it with his parents. "So they know you are still thinking of them," he'd said. The ceremony was simple. A local minister spoke about justice and remembrance. David gave a brief eulogy, his voice breaking only once. "My parents were ordinary people who believed in something extraordinary. That right matters more than power. That you stand up for what's true, even when it costs you everything." He looked around at the crowd. For 52 years, they were buried in an unmarked grave in the woods, erased, forgotten by everyone except the people who killed them. But they're here now, acknowledged, honored, and the truth they died protecting is finally known. He placed white roses on the caskets before they were lowered into the ground. Martha's favorite flower, according to her diary. Sarah stepped forward next. "Mrs. Hartley saved my life that night. She could have sent me home. Instead, she hid me with David. She protected 2 children she knew she might never see again." Her voice wavered. "I'm sorry it took me 52 years to say thank you." Frank placed the photograph of Michael and David on the grave. "These boys should have grown up together." should have had lives full of normal things, sports, college, families of their own. One didn't survive his grief, the other survived but lost himself. This is what corruption costs. Not just the people it kills, but the ones it leaves behind. Then Lily stepped forward. She unwrapped the wooden horse and knelt beside the grave. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, I'm Lily. I'm 10 now. I found your house and your room and your story. I found David too. She placed the horse gently on the earth. I promise we'll take care of the house. I promise we'll tell people about you. And I promise David will never be alone again. Amelia stood behind her daughter, hand on her shoulder. Around them, people wept openly. This wasn't just a burial. It was a healing. As the caskets were lowered, David spoke one final time, so quietly only those closest could hear. I'm home, Mom. Dad, I'm finally home. After the ceremony, people lingered. Some approached David to offer condolences or share memories of the case. Others simply stood in respectful silence. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, painting everything in shades of gold. Frank found Amelia near the edge of the gathering. You did this. You started all of this. Lily started it. She's the one who kept looking. You both did, and you didn't stop when most people would have. He looked toward the fresh grave. Michael would have liked you both. He had that same stubborn streak. Once he believed something was right, he wouldn't let it go. Sarah joined them, Margaret moving slowly at her side. I've been thinking about what happens next, Sarah said. David mentioned wanting to open the house as a memorial. I'd like to help, maybe bring my students. Teach them that silence in the face of injustice is itself a kind of injustice. That would mean everything to him, Amelia replied. Margaret reached out and touched Lily's cheek. You remind me of Martha. She had that same fire, that same refusal to accept what was wrong. She smiled. The world needs more people like you, child. As the sun descended, the crowd gradually dispersed. But Amelia, Lily, Frank, David, and Sarah remained, standing together as afternoon shifted into evening. David looked back toward where his parents now rested. The stone was simple but clear. Robert and Martha Hartley, beloved parents, defenders of justice, together again. The house will open next month, David said. Frank's been overseeing the restoration. The hidden room stays exactly as it was. Everything else, we're making it accessible, safe, but keeping its character. What about you? Amelia asked. Are you staying in Oregon? Part-time. I'm keeping my practice in Portland, but I bought a place here. I need to be close to them and to the house. It's part of me in a way I'm still understanding. He looked at Lily. Besides, someone needs to make sure our youngest curator doesn't turn the place into an amusement park. Lily grinned. I was thinking more like a detective academy. They laughed, the sound carrying across the cemetery, proof that even in places meant for mourning, life persisted. As they walked back to their cars, Lily turned to look at the cave one last time. The wooden horse sat where she'd placed it, a small guardian keeping watch. Mom, she said quietly, do you think they're proud of what we did? Amelia knelt down, meeting her daughter's eyes. I think they're grateful. Grateful that someone cared enough to look, to ask questions, to refuse to let them stay forgotten. And David? Is he okay now? Amelia glanced at David, walking ahead with Frank and Sarah, the three of them talking quietly. I think he's getting there. He has his parents back. Not the way he'd hoped, but he knows what happened. He knows they loved him. Sometimes that's enough. They reached the cars as the last light faded from the sky. Frank promised to call about the memorial opening. Sarah embraced David one more time, whispering something Amelia couldn't hear. Margaret waved from her daughter's car. David walked over to Amelia and Lily. I don't know how to thank you. You gave me back my life, my name, my family. You don't have to thank us, Amelia said. We only found what was already there. But you looked when no one else would. He crouched to Lily's level. And you, young lady, you have a gift for finding hidden things. Don't lose that. The world needs people who look in dark corners and aren't afraid of what they find. Lily nodded solemnly. I won't. I promise. As they drove away, Amelia watched the cemetery disappear in the rearview mirror. Beside her, Lily was quiet, processing the day. In the back seat, the empty space where the wooden horse had been felt significant. Mom, can we go see the house before we go home? Amelia checked the time. Late, but not too late. Sure, baby. They drove through the forest as darkness settled over the trees. When they reached the clearing, the house stood silhouetted against the deepening sky. Frank had installed new exterior lights, safe, modern, but positioned to preserve the structure's character. They sat in the car for a moment, looking at it. It's not scary anymore, Lily observed. No, it's not. It was protecting them, their story, waiting for someone to understand. And you did. You understood. They got out and walked to the porch. Amelia had a key now. David had given it to her, saying she had as much right to it as he did. She unlocked the door and they stepped inside. The house felt different than that first day. Warmer somehow, less burdened. Frank had been working steadily, repairing structural damage, replacing rotted boards, making it safe without erasing its history. The living room where they'd found the hidden drawer still held its old furniture, now cleaned and restored. The fireplace where cold ashes had puzzled them was ready for its first fire in 52 years. They climbed the stairs. The bedroom where the wardrobe had stood was empty. Now, the massive piece of furniture carefully moved to a corner where visitors could see it but access the hidden door easily. The door itself stood open, a soft light illuminating the stairs down. Lily descended without hesitation. Amelia followed. The hidden room remained untouched. The small bed with its patterned quilt, the desk, the shelves with toys, the stars and clouds painted on the walls, faded but still visible. A place built by love and desperation. A sanctuary that had saved a child's life. Lily sat on the bed just as David had done months ago. He slept here, and Sarah, they were so scared. But they survived. Because of this room, because Martha and Robert protected them. And now everyone will know. Kids will come here and learn that even when things are scary, there are people who fight back, who protect the ones they love. Amelia sat beside her daughter. For a moment, they simply existed in the quiet. Two people in a room built for hiding that had become a place of revelation. We should go, Amelia said eventually. It's late. As they climbed back upstairs and locked the door behind them, Amelia felt something shift. A weight she'd been carrying since that first hike. Since buying this house on impulse, since diving into a mystery that had consumed a year of their lives, it lifted. They'd done it. They'd found the truth. They'd brought a family home. Driving back through the dark forest, Lily fell asleep against the window. Amelia drove carefully, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. A failed marriage, a struggling single mother, a curious daughter with sharp eyes and a stubborn heart, and a house that had waited 52 years for someone to listen. Some truths arrive late, but they arrive nonetheless. And when they do, they change everything. Not just for the dead who can finally rest, but for the living who refuse to let them stay forgotten. The Hartley house would open its doors next month. Lily would guide her first tour, telling visitors about a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl who hid in a room underground while evil men searched above. About parents who died protecting their child. About a community that stayed silent for half a century, and about ordinary people who decided that silence was no longer acceptable. The story would be told. The truth would be known. Robert and Martha Hartley would be remembered, and somewhere in the forest, in a house that had kept its secrets for so long, their legacy would live on. Not as victims, but as symbols of the courage it takes to stand against corruption, even when the cost is everything. Justice had arrived late, but it had arrived.
So, der ist jetzt auf Spot. Jetzt cleart der Site. Jetzt wird er vielleicht nochmal Cranky checken. Ja. Der zieht wahrscheinlich nicht durch, weil er denkt, er ist Main. Ja, er zieht jetzt wieder durch, ja. Er hat nicht Hälfte, ne?
Nee, er hat nicht
Stark.
gehabt.
Sehr gut. Sehr gut.
Oh, ist ja dumm.
Das war eigentlich dumm von ihm.
Also Zeit hatte er für
Ich
Hälfte.
hab auch damit gerechnet, dass er...
Sehr stark. Auf geht's.
Ich weiß nicht, ob der durchzieht oder nicht.
Bräuchte mal einen Drop die Runde.
Alrighty.
Kannst du uns hier eine Smoke legen und wir machen einfach Double Go.
Ja.
Soll ich Mitte oder Main gehen?
Hier Mitte, Exi.
Wo wollt ihr die Viper Wollen haben? Oder einfach
Die kannst du
sparen?
trotzdem auf,
War
die
Default.
kannst du auch
Okay.
einfach defaultmäßig machen. Du musst ja nicht hochnehmen.
Ich mach sie mal so hin hier. Auf geht's. Hallo Wolzahn. Willkommen.